with the visionary developments of the scientists of the 60s, 70s, and also the science cinema, popular cinema of the cinema studio Kyivnauk film. We may say that the main scientific breakthrough was cybernetics, in particular, which emerged at the cross-section of lots of disciplines, both humanitarian and technical. And this avant-garde sphere of science included all the possible technical innovations of its time and the developments in cyberspace, artificial intelligence, neuron networks, biocybernetic technologies, and also digital ones. But as for me, the unique is not only the concentration of technological innovations in the cybernetics in that time, but just the connection of them, trying to understand the political issues and their own developments. So, my is to Vera Polyanska. Lera, would you please tell, as for your work, it is done in the way that it really reminds the laboratory at the cross-section of different spheres, or the network where they value horizontal connections. You are both the art group's leader and the co-founder of the studio, and the participant in there as well. And in the school and in this group, you're working both at the individual projects and the collective ones. So would you please tell a bit more details how your art practices are created? Thank you, Sasha, for your question. Well, it's a bit hard to describe because they are a bit non-standard. We need to begin with how, well, just a short preamble, how my art practice began. It began in art group's Viter, which used to be just a group, the musical band, and which I founded together with Max Robotov and two other participants, Slavik and Artem. During some time, it was just the musical band. Then we decided to work with Ivan Svetlichny, and we understood with Max that it's not that enough for us to be within music. Music does not reflect all of our wishes. So we understood that for art, this is the sphere where we could express ourselves better. So getting acquainted with Ivan and cooperating with Ivan, this is how we began our art activity and the principle of work. The principle of work, well, we're always laughing that it's kind of a, how can I say, well, a kind of a slavery. Because, for instance, when Ivan is working on his project, we with Marx are just helping him, and we never saying that we could be co-authors. Even if we solve together some issues, still this is his work as an author. So this is how we work with an art group. Vitor and Ivan helps us. And the same practice, as for now, is working at the school, at the studio, because we have a certain circle of participants, and each of these participants, some of them have advantages, some of them weaknesses, and in this way, each of us can cover some of the weaknesses of the other one. So it's a kind of a collective, a teamwork. Sometimes we're laughing that this communism needs to be here. Would you please tell what media artist means, what it means to be a media artist, and which media you're working with? Well, what it means to be a media artist, well, it's even worse than to be just an artist, at least within Ukraine. I don't have any professional academic art education. And when I say that I'm the artist, everybody's asking, what do you paint? What kind of pictures? And I'm trying to say that I'm not painting pictures. And I know that there is such a response when I say that I don't have a proper academic education, but I'm an artist. Everybody has a very superficial and, you know, condescending attitude. What kind of an artist are you? But when I go on that I'm a media artist and work with contemporary art, that's just the end. I'm not interesting to anyone after that, so it's not that nice. This is not that my mom could say to her friends about. But altogether, it's rather interesting because it really is corresponded to what is happening in the world. It is correspondent to what's interesting for me. All of the skills which I've gained, the musical ones, as I've told, because I began with the music and ending with the text, can be reflected in the contemporary art. And it's really interesting and pleasant. Your collective work and your experience beyond the body, which was included into the exhibition, was created during the lockdown. So it's interesting for me that pandemics and rethinking of well, it impacts the body. The body practice impacts not only art. One of the famous cinema festivals of independent cinema, Sundance, this year created the full-scale virtual platform for their audience. It's a kind of a cinephile option of a Second Life, where the visitors can create their own avatar in the 3D space and move it, and even to add to this avatar their picture to be recognized, and also to interact, to communicate with each other. And of course, this extracorporeal work was created much more complicated way technologically and conceptually. Would you tell about the media which you were using during the work and about the concept of this work? Yes, thank you. I got the question. Well, yeah, I need to say that this work was really a kind of a reflection of the last year. It's last year work, and it began and was created during the first stage of the lockdown. Everybody remembers that it was a rather weird period when we didn't know what to do. We didn't understand what to rush to, and we understood instantly that mostly all of the our activities were done offline mostly. But then when lockdown began, we understood that we just have to go on doing with the school together, because it will be a kind of a permanent thing, a constant thing. As it seemed to us, it will keep us together in the normal state, in the state of the normal and understandable way of life. And of course, how we could move online, we, the people who are totally working with digital art, because for us, online was a very convenient form. And during the work, during all of the studios, we understood that we would like that we have several questions to the current situation, the issue of borders. Well, I would say not only for the current situation with the lockdown, but also the situation because we were sad about the Crimea, because since the very beginning we had the issue of borders to the sea. Oh, I totally changed the topic somehow. So yes, to some extent it was reflection on the lockdown, the impossibility to cross the borders. To the other extent, it was the situation to feel yourselves in the isolated space of the room. And we even came to the practices of Beuys on the creation of the common body, some kind of, well, yes, common body. And Sturluck's practices, because he had a concept of the body parts which can be rented to other people, people from the other countries, if you have such an experience. And we thought that it's very important to understand us as a system of a social body, if some body part of the social body impacts for this body to be healthy. So we created some performance. This is something at the cross-section of the virtual game and the performance, the virtual game with the instruments. But the aim was that all of the participants of the performance, and we were located at the first point, those are our rooms, and the final point were pits. But to get to the sea, we need to get out of our room, then to find each other, and then together combining ourselves into something common, Frankenstein body, together we should get to the sea. So in the end of the day, we created it, but it was a very long, funny, and ridiculous process. The main tool was a virtual platform, but a huge significance was the sound. had the sound, and also the principles according to which the performers interacted with those formerly saying avatars, which the performers represented. Because as for the avatars, we had the idea of body parts. Someone was kidneys, someone was the nose, and so on. And there were interesting developed principles of body parts governance. Dimatantsuk, who was also working as a DJ, he, with the help of the DJ deck, could totally manage and administer his character and so on. There were totally diverse ways and principles to manage them. Well, I guess I explained it more or less in a comprehensible way. Yes, thank you. In your work, the Subtle Girl, you were working with the archive films about cybernetics and about the scientific achievements which we selected according to the generative algorithm. Would you please tell what the generative algorithm is and the question whether it is really means the significance of the human view? Sorry, I didn't hear you. Is it add the significance to the human view in the cinema and during the editing process? Well, yes, as for the generative algorithm, what it is, well, in fact, I have the problem, how can I explain my works? Well, because it's easy to do than to explain. But as for this work, it's even worse and scary for me. If I just speak about the generative algorithm, I will begin with the basics. How I can present what algorithm is. The algorithm is a sequence of actions. If we speak about the generative algorithm, this is the algorithm according to which and after its action something is generated. If we speak at the example of non-computers, but something well known, it seems to me that this idea is very well illustrated by the kaleidoscope. The situation with the kaleidoscope. We have the input data. Those are totally multicolored pieces of glass and the algorithm. The kaleidoscope needs to be turned, and each time when you turn it, that is, you act with an algorithm, the picture is changing. That's altogether what generative algorithm is. If we come to my work, and you asked me to tell about the work itself, right? Well, because I got carried with it. Well, it was interesting to me to get to know from you the definition of generative algorithm, and you answered that question already. So maybe instantly I could ask you about the work of the bifurcation point, because it's also based upon the generative algorithm, but it is working with the animation. Yes, the work bifurcation point is the work of Alexander Sirus, and I'd like to mention for those who maybe have just joined us that we are speaking now about the online exhibition, but all of the works which we are creating now have been planned also to be at the offline exhibition, which we still hope will be organized. And the online format, Alexander has shown the fragments from his project, and in fact, it was a very big fragment which needs to be gradual, stage by stage implementation, and it is done out of the pieces. Alexander, by his background, is an animator. He's working a lot with animation. He's interested in animation. And in this work, he's considering animation from the perspective of the history. For each of the historical periods, well, each historical period is characterized by fashion for some animation. For instance, in the style, we can understand, by the style of the animation, we can understand what historical period we're speaking about. And Alexander is considering and using animation in his project as an opportunity to appeal to some historical events and also social components, because history is connected with the societal issues, and from the perspective of our representation in the virtual world, because animation is one of the main tools, maybe the main tool, in the virtual games and virtual platforms. That is just if we speak all together, overall, in the wholesome manner about his project. And if we speak about the fragment which you can see at the website of DOCU Days now, this is the piece which concerns the existence of the person in the virtual world, the avatar of the person, and the focus of attention. The focus of attention of this character. Well, this is a very wholesome manner of explanation. I will just add a small addition and amendment. Those fragments can be seen not at the site of DOCU Days, but at the DOCU Space one. It's important. And I'm instantly coming now to this offline part of the exhibition you've mentioned. That's true. The offline part of the exhibition, Well-trodden Connections, should have happened in the gallery in April. It's also delayed because of the lockdown. The plans were grander. It should be a total multimedia project with the installations which have been created by the artists, with the archive movies from Kyivnauk film and the works of the students in the studio. And one of the films of Kyivnauk films, which were this work based upon, was artificial intelligence, or if to be more precise, electronic brain. This is the quote, the phrase which we can hear in the movie Eternal Search. You should have had the new work, which would be devoted to the brain, sensor touch. Could you please tell about it a bit and explain how it should be? I should spoiler it, yes, a bit. Well, in fact, it's not that easy for me to tell about this project in pieces, because for us it is very wholesome and a complex one. And each of the works, again, brings us back to the idea of corporality. Each work should function as the part of a whole organism. But if we speak about the sense of touch work, this is the work of Daniel Sabro, and as for me, it's very funny. Well, in a nice sense of the word, because it's very tactile, because the artist can see this work as some subconscious actions of ours, which the society impacts upon. Well, it's obvious. And of course, it's understandable that we are in the constant feedback with the surrounding world, and the work is created in the way that the viewers getting to this zone, they're watching the film of Kyivnauk film, Kyiv scientific film, and there they have some of the traces of the brain, and when the viewers are interacting and touching this brain, we wouldn't like them to know what is happening, but in fact, unexpectedly for them, they will impact the human figure, which is presented at one of the screens of the exhibition. And depending on the zones which the viewers are touching, this human figure is transforming. So formally saying, this is the kind of a reflection of an artist, what I was speaking about, this kind of an unexpected, non-understandable, even to us, impact from beyond, which we then broadcast through ourselves again to the external world. We have a very visionary conversation here. We appeal to the attention of the viewers for them to imagine all of those works so far. We do hope that we'll be able to see them later in person. And I'm still interested in the question about some other work, which is focused on the heart. This is the latest work with my questions. We're saying that a different film of the studio of Kyivnauk film is devoted to the well-known cardiosurgeon MykolaAmosov and his invention, artificial heart, his cooperation with Viktor Lushkov and in biocybernetics. And in the offline exhibition, you should have had the new work which would be devoted to the heart, right? Because it's a very interesting mechanism working there. Could you please tell about the new media used there? Yes, it turned out to be a very unexpected thing for us, as we already were speaking about this project with our students, formally saying, sometimes we say they're our students as the participants of our studio, but in fact, this is the formality. So it turned out that one of them, the artist who has the name of the ghost, this is his pseudonym, his mom, in fact, is working as a cardiosurgeon, and this topic for him is rather close and understandable, as this topic is close to him. He instantly had an idea of this project, which is the following. Looking at the technologies from the perspective of the opportunities of some idealistic positions of transcommunism, we may try to create the situation when the person himself or herself can impact the heartbeat. It can be balanced, and the work can be created in the way that there is some data which is shaping the musical background and the certain graph. This graph can be compared with a cardiogram, with the CT. And when the viewer is hearing and seeing the cardiogram, he or she intuitively understands when the cardiogram is working, when everything is okay with this heart, and when it is frustrated to some extent. When it is frustrated, the viewer has the opportunity to synchronize this rhythm and this cardiogram with the primary first normal state of work, pushing the button of sync. I would like to remind that you may pose your questions to our speakers. And I would like to ask Tanya a bit more details about the definition and the context of media art. Tatiana, would you please tell? The interdisciplinary character is the key trait of media art. The artists are combining in their work the light, the color, and the sound. Could you tell in more details what media is and medium in the art? Tatiana, would you turn on the mic? You've turned off the microphone. It's okay. Just a moment. Now we can hear you. Okay, good evening. Do you hear me? Yes, we do. Now everything is okay. Well, the question of the medium and media in the art, it seems to me this is the question which is totally expanding its borders and needs new definitions, because we always have some confusion. Medium or media in the art, media art, or media in the art. Those are three different notions. Medium and media, the media in the art and media of the art. So it is connected with the situation that the art during its development, the history of the art was constantly included and can enter the different areas of knowledge. And if we speak about the interdisciplinary character, it is connected not only with the media art, but with contemporary art as it is, because according to its nature, it is already intermediate. We will not find the artist who would today consequently work with the studies of one media only, and the in-depth studies of one medium would be maybe the most radical gesture today, because lots of modern artists, vice versa, are not even saying what media they are researching and which media they're working with, because first, the primary is the idea, and they choose the convenient form which is important for the implementation of this or that project. But if we are speaking about the medium, the word medium is also the term which not all of the art historians consider to be successful, because this is just what we take from the English language, and neither Ukrainian nor Russian have this stable terminology. We are using the word medium because if we speak about some classical system, as we speak about the academic way of art, we spoke about the painting, graphics, and sculpture as three main kinds of art. And then later, when we expand different media, and we can see the artists begin to work with the objects, with some found materials, the cinematography emerges, the photography emerges. So different forms and formats of self-expression which are implemented into art. So altogether we can see a huge number of forms, and translating from English, the word medium is of Latin origin. Medium is just singular, and media is plural from medium. So there are more and more forms, and we are just replacing this notion. When we use this word, we're just covering all the variety of forms which exist in the art and which the art is using on its territory. When we speak about the expansion of this vocabulary, visual art, undoubtedly such radical change is provided by the emergence of photography. And an interesting idea, which is expressed by the philosopher, the art historian, André Rouillet, he is saying that the photography is totally redistributed the relationship between the image, the reality, and the artist himself or herself. And he even says the body of the artist. If, according to Rouillet, the artist created some painting, for instance, the brush was just the continuation of the arm of the painter. But when the photography emerged instead of the arm, here we can see chemical and optical device, so we have a certain intermediary. And maybe because of the photography, we can speak about this medium as an intermediary, because photography with its emergence just destructs this unity of the body of the artist and what he creates. And then historically, we are speaking about the 60s, when the media art emerged and appeared, which is connected with the studies of the information, the new forms of communication, first of all, the TV. We do understand that besides the medium, the photography, where there is an optical device, the machine is becoming the intermediary between the artist and the perceived reality. We do understand that in the 60s of the 20th century, we can see the further development, and in its essence, with each new epoch, the notion of the new media is transformed. And even if we take literature, for instance, the books of the 60s, they had the notion of media art, but later, when media has developed, we can understand that the formulation are becoming not media art, but just the studies of the new media. And then further on, it will be just the new media in art, how the new media are coming to the art. And in the 60s, there was an important breakthrough. I do apologize. Well, it is connected with information, with the research of the information, and with the electronic media emerging, and the image in the 60s and the 70s, the artworks are based in their creation on the image which can be perceived as the moving picture, and also the image, not even the image, but the art image, can be created without any reference in the real material world which surrounds us. In this way, the notion of the new media is constantly developing, and the new media in the art is each time the redistribution of these relations. In the 19th century, photography redistributed these relations, and with each new epoch, this redistribution of relations is taking place, and the new forms of communication emerges. You're very intensely are coming from the previous topics to the forms of self-expression, and the official pioneer of media art has been acknowledged, John Pike has been acknowledged, but formally speaking, in the media art, this process is done with lots of participants, and we know that in the 60s, Robert Rauschenberg and Millie Clover have created a big interdisciplinary project at the intersection of different types of the art and new technologies, where they involved more than 30 engineers. A bit later, in London, they've opened a bigger exhibition of cybernetic view, but well, the whole word is serendipity, which cannot be totally interpreted into Ukrainian. It's a kind of intuitive serendipity. And this exhibition also collected and gained more than 100 scientists and engineers. And some of the researchers are connecting the development of the art with this event as well. So media art, since the very beginning, is at the cross-section of the art itself, science, and the technology. Could you tell in more details how we use technology and scientific developments at the territory of the art? Yes, sure. Media art, well, undoubtedly, this is the kind of art which emerges at the intersection of science and technology and the new forms of communication which are used in the modern world. So this is the art which is interdisciplinary, cross-sectoral. We cannot just define one medium because, in fact, we have many forms which are flowing from one to another. But if we speak about some precise examples, one of these examples was mentioned today in the conversation with Lera, Second Life, and how those avatars are created and how this community is formed. If we speak about the art field, a very interesting example is the work of Chao Fei, the Chinese artist who worked with this model. She used the platform of Second Life to create her multidisciplinary project, and she created an avatar. Well, I don't remember what was the name, but she was in this system, and being an artist herself with the artistic and academic background dealing with installations and painting and different media, she's creating the image, a possible image of the future, Beijing. She has her own avatar, and the prototypes are different people from the art community who are observing the development of a certain city. She is creating the references, some of the sightseeings of the places for Beijing, and forms some different city of future creation. This could be a nice example because Chao Fei has been working with the scientists, and she provided the researchers of the art community. It was the social project and some criticism on what is taking place in the city, how we have the construction sites at the modern Beijing. So this is the work which created at the intersection of the technologies and urbanism, social studies, critical and political statement, and also some forms of the virtual reality. This is one of the the brightest examples of the modern art, which is involving different media. I don't know whether I answered your question. Yes, sure. We are now at the intersection of different disciplines, finally. I would like to come back to cybernetics a bit. When it emerged in the 50s and 60s, it used to be surrounded by the incredibly naive, and including public and expanded conversations, whether the computer is able to think. And to some extent, we're coming back to the similar point, and we begin to speak whether the algorithms can coexist with the humans. To some extent, with the future, in the future, this discussion will seem to be very naive. Still, we are now at this point. So I'd like to ask you whether cybernetic art exists, how you treat this notion. Well, I don't know whether this notion is already approved, because we have the similar notion in English, cybernetic art, which is considered to be an opportunity, that the cybernetics is one of the ways, one of the means which the artists are using in their work. It can be considered the cybernetics as the art piece. The cybernetic art, well, it seems to me to say to full extent that what this notion is, we need to fully understand what we mean when we say the notion itself. Because as far as I understand, as far as I know, if we speak about the sources, about the beginnings of the notion and the scientist Norbert Wiener, then cybernetics, in the overall field, cybernetics, first of all, is associated with the calculation and computer technologies. When Wiener wrote his book, The Science on the Management in the Living Organisms and Machines, he in fact used this notion, cybernetics, even when they didn't have the first bigger calculation machines, computing machines, when we didn't have the computers in the usual understanding of the word. And he shows this notion analyzing, and in the book itself, about the living organisms and machines, he is analyzing the processes which are taking place, the similarity of the process of the tremor of the human hand when, for instance, the person is suffering, with the deviations of the gun at the ship. When it is aiming, we can see the same tremor, and it was important for him to find out the movement of the gun when there is the one force and the force which brings it back. The same happens with the shaking hand. Those are the similar processes which you can find both in the device and the machine and the living organism. So he was interested in this feedback, which force is forming this feedback, and he was interested in the processes, some common tendencies in the management idea. Would you please tell, we have mentioned in one conversation, when we're speaking about that before, we're mentioning algorithmic painting, computer animation. So if we take that to some specific forms, could you now try and define whether you consider this notion to be acceptable in some professional toolkit, the cybernetic art, or this is a kind of a construction which is totally artificial, which doesn't have any substantiation? Well, of course it can. But still, it seems to me that this is the background issue. I was trained in the art academy, and I'm considering always the art pieces and works, and it seems to me that any technology can be used by the artists and totally implemented by the artist, but it seems to me that the development of the technologies and the technology itself cannot be read considered to be the piece of the artwork. It seems to me that there should be several points. The medium and the research of the media by the artist, the technology which is necessary to reflect a certain idea, and the intentions of the artist himself or herself. When all those three components are combined, then we have the artwork. But undoubtedly, the first attempts or tries of the computer art, the researcher Michael Knoll, who is in the 60s, has created the paintings which were generated by the computers. Maybe he even named them computer pictures, but that was a researcher of the Bell Laboratory who claimed to have the role of an artist. But it seems to me this is more interest to the technologies, and this is a very important beginning, the source. But the art is implemented when we have the intention of the artist. And as for the medium, we can remember, because it just occurred to me, the statement of Harold Zaman, the curator, who's created a very well-known exhibition when the relationship is becoming the form. And he created this exhibition in 1969. And when he described the artists whom he chose for the exhibition, he wrote that 2 years ago, that is in the middle of the 60s, all of the artists were so inspired by the computers and the technologies, and that the media and the message, this famous statement, were very nice. But now, vice versa, the faith into the machines is replacing the artistic process. And today, when we came through the whole history, this whole story, and the development of the art and computer technologies and their implementation into the art, and the art process as it is, and the intention of the artist, the technology will be able to work together to create the synthetic artwork, which is now at the intersection of different disciplines. It's a very logical connection, how we came on our own to the question which I was planning to ask. And I would like to pose this question both to Lera and you. Maybe it would be interesting to answer it, because during the discussion about the vernacular cinema at DOCU Days, it's a separate program, the researchers Graham Sperr has expressed such an opinion that the amateur art, in particular cinema, it can be the last island which counteracts the oppression of the algorithmic art. To some extent, it really resonates to what you just told us. How would you, Tanya and Lera, comment upon that? Well, amateur art, the cinema which doesn't have a very specific structure of the professional film, doesn't have the tools, but it's not structured as the professional cinema, and its chaotic character, some singularity, it counteracts, because it's the last bastion, it's the last asylum which totally counteracts the art of consequent algorithms, the algorithmic art, and any works created in this sphere. Well, in fact, algorithm is not what now in all of the spheres. Because if we speak about the modern art, I've never heard about such a problem in the cinema, and it seems to me that the professionals, the experts, and the amateurs may not see that they are working within some algorithms. And for the professionals, it's easier to research the algorithms, whether they can counteract it. The experts, what I mean, the people who are dealing with that professionally for a long time. and just spend all the time working with that. It seems to me not everything should be algorithms, because it's still important to have an intention of the artist, the author, the film director. And it can be at the intersection, it can exist. But not any, it seems to me, not any artwork created with algorithms is the artwork. I also have a question about the local context. One of the big researchers of the Ukrainian art in the 90s, which used to take place several years ago, it stated that there were lots of video documentation and but of the performance morphing, video clipping, performative cinema, but there were almost no works with cyberspace, connected with the cyberspace, with the computer networks, with the virtual reality. But still there is a huge bulk of the demo scenes of the subculture of the IT guys of the 80s. This is the computer art at the primitive carriers like the computer spectrum, but they never intersected with the professional art field, and they stayed under-researched, not researched enough. According to your opinion, Tanya and Lera, can we consider some local sources for the media art, just them exactly? It seems to me just in the end of the 80s, there was a certain circle of the artists, I'd say the people who had cinematographic background first and foremost. For instance, Oleg Chorny, who then experimented with different techniques in the 90s. Well, maybe if we speak about the art itself, it seems to me that in the 90s, the artists were unconsciously treating that. There were certain artists, maybe some certain persons who in the end of the 80s could experiment, as I said, that was Oleg Chorny, Alexander Dyrdovsky, who had cinematographic background, and with it, using it, they came to some interdisciplinary zones. But I don't think that, well, it's hard for me to answer this question. I've never researched deep the 60s and the 70s. And with the new media, it seems to me this is the new development of the new media, which emerges in the end of the 90s, the beginning of 2000s, when we have two festivals emerging. The first is Dreamcatcher, and then later there was the festival which had the name of Kyivnauk, Kyiv International Media Art Festival. And an important component of this festival was to have educational programs, and the artists who graduated from the academy, maybe even not, who never touched the technologies, they were trained to code and to implement their works. Gleb Tkachuk was working a lot there together with Olga Koshembekova, Alexander Vereshchak with Margarita Zinets. There used to be many duos which dealt with media art, and it seems to me that the important part of these festivals was in their educational component. But if we speak altogether about the media art and the history of media art, the researcher who was consequently dealing with that in Ukraine is Yanina Prudenko, and her open media archive and the book where she researches cybernetics within the art. It seems to me this is where we need to look at, to study and to understand what can be the source. Because I, in fact, was dealing with the art of the 80s and the 90s. And in fact, the 90s, all of the artists which were dealing with the video or performance, they still treated it as a total tabula rasa, something new. What never existed in the art before, in our local art. So these are the experiments of theirs. And do you consider they can be considered to be media art, or is this a debatable question? Well, it depends on the personalia of persons and the attitude of the intention, because we can say that someone got the video camera and began to experiment with the moving pictures, but it won't be compulsory the work of art. If we speak about the 90s and today, we can have the parallel between the artist Vasily Tsegolov, because this is the artist. It's interesting that he mentioned himself that I would imagine myself a film director, but my medium is art, painting. That's why I'm dealing with the painting, but still in the 90s, he created lots of video works. He created the interventions. For instance, the intervention at the TV channel of ICTV, it used to be a development of the whole concept, a kind of the philosophical concept of the hard TV. He imagined that the world is the global TV broadcast, a kind of a visual flow, and you may construct any reality at the TV studio. So it seems to me the similar research is done now by Kola-Ridney in his works, in particular in his project of Armed and Dangerous. This is also the project which exists at the intersection of different experiments with the picture, with the moving picture. So the project where Kola-Ridney simultaneously has the community of the artists and using the found materials and staged scenes, and it seems to me between him and Tsegolov, there can be lots of parallels. If Tsegolov thought about the TV as the source of the post-truth, Kola is working consequently with this concept. Between them, there can be lots of in common. But I don't think that Tsegolov had some attitude towards the processes which took place in the 60s and the 70s. It was more of the discovery of the Western cinema industry which impacted the artists in the 90s. I will agree with you here. Well, it's easy to see that the thematic focus when you work in the archive of Kyivnauk film during the existence of the studio is having a kind of a totally obvious ode to the mind, and then it goes deeper into some paranormal activities, and then scientific popular cinema gave to the 90s, to the new times which were emerging, it gave some new sense. And does the art now feel the same lost character, seeing the technology and their speed of development? In Ukraine, yes, it seems to me that I would ask altogether, not only in Ukraine, some observations on the processes which are taking place in some, well, I don't know, some overall network of contemporary art, if we can make it and formulate it like this. It seems to me that this network is segmented more and more now, because I don't think that the artists who position themselves and who work with and position themselves as the professional artists, they consider themselves as the beginning of the career artists. I think they just don't have the speed and the resource to come back there, for instance. And altogether, on the one hand, yes, they have some perplexity seeing the world which is dynamically changing, and every day we have new challenges. But on the other hand, everybody is quickly grasping the new spheres. They don't have this gap between the event and the response. The response is very quick now, and the next day everybody is using it already. In one of the programs of this year festival, there is such a film, Citizen Bio, about the biohacking. But in fact, biohacking or bio DIY is some technological body modifications with the body. One of the famous media in the modern art, semi-Australian artist Stellark, the pioneer of this sphere to some extent. And one of the works has the reference on him. So the question is more on the edge of posthumanism or transhumanism, whether the person should be improved and made better, or we should come to other existences or non-existence. A famous philosopher, Bruno Latour, claims that the subjectivity of some living organisms of the planet should be focused upon, but non-living as well. In particular, the viruses, bacteria, and so on. Lera and Tanya, in your opinion, is there anything which can help us imagine what the art of future looks like? It seems to me that the art of the future is the art which will be done by robots. The next evolution which will come to us. But as for subjectivity, well, whether the people are subjective enough. Of course, we need to improve people because everything is so beautiful how it should be. But as for the people with whom we have some complications, they need to be improved. Tanya? Well, I don't know. For me, this is the key question now. What the art will look like and what is my role or as a curator, which new forms can exist of the interaction, because we're most of all are taken to some thematic exhibitions. Can we speak about some new language and the new forms? In particular, I remember today Harold Zeman, who has done in the curator's work the total rethinking of this figure, and with his name we connect the curator's work as the separate unit. It's an open question for me because so far we haven't invented a different form of presentation of the art as an exhibition, even if it's an online exhibition. Very often online exhibition does not take into consideration the digital nature, but just is using the analog 3-dimension space only. But in the digital way, they introduce that online. For me, it's a big question. I think about that. What can be done? What can be given? And which new forms of interaction can emerge? Well, maybe in this, well, I don't know whether we can show now several pictures, imaginary projects, because we were speaking about the pictures which are generated by the algorithms. Maybe this future will be in some anonymous forms, which will totally fill in our space. For instance, now at the screen, you can see the project of the German mathematicians, the project which had the name of Imaginary. And the task, the primary task of this project was that this project was developed by algebraist Martin Kroll from Germany. His idea was to show the beauty of mathematics and to visualize the algebraic curved surfaces of different wonderful shapes. Lots of objects remind us some practices of avant-garde art. And the first and foremost message was to popularize mathematics and to visualize the forms and literally to show the beauty of the mathematics. It led to the situation that this project is existing for more than 20 years. It is developed in different countries, in different universities, and scientific research centers are taking this idea and creating the special technical software to take some separate notions in algebra to visualize them. And what's curious about that at some moment out of those forms, well, you can see the 2D pictures, they began to create some sculptures, and those sculptures were brought into the art collections. So maybe, for me, personally, at this stage, this project is a beautiful one, some interdisciplinary project, but I wouldn't say that this is the work of art. But if we speak about the future, maybe it will be some form of life which will emerge in our daily life, which we will not articulate as art. I don't know. This is the question. Where we can find that language which will be adequate to our time. Maybe those new forms which will emerge, they will produce themselves some new art forms, maybe, probably, as the networking. Okay, thank you so much, because in fact we are out of time unexpectedly, as we said that we will be online for about an hour. I thank you for such a conversation, and I do hope that we'll still have an opportunity to look at not only the online part of the exhibition, the Well-trodden Connections, which is prolonged till the 18th of April, and you can visit it at the website of DocuSpace, and offline part of the exhibition. We do hope someday after the lockdown, we'll be able, we do hope, for all of that, because lots of efforts were spent to create it, and the multiple cyber body would like to see them live and to get this experience of interaction with each other and with the objects which have been created by the Svitor Art Group and the studio and Ivan Svetlichny. Thank you so much. Goodbye and have a nice evening.